because we don't have school on Monday. Y'all will be having your next quiz, your next online quiz on Tuesday. And when I put up the quiz review and everything tomorrow, I'll also put your next exercise, which will be out of here, which will be on the decree of April 1832, I believe. Anyway, I'll give you the page numbers and all that fun stuff when I assign them. Okay, so now we're kind of in the crescendo of Texas. Let me make sure I'm filming. The twilight of Texas. Basically, Spain held on to Texas for so long, it's surprising how quickly everything kind of falls apart compared to how long she was here before. Period from 1863 or 1763 to 1821. And the one country that kind of caused or accelerated Spain to come and occupy Texas is also responsible for its downfall. Now, what country kind of pressured Spain to get interested in Texas? Huh?
France.
France. And then France done did it again. Here you can see this is the end of the 7 Years' War. A war that lasted 7 years. It's also called the Great War for Empire. It's called the French Indian War. But anyway, Spain wasn't even involved in it. It was between France and England, the two superpowers of the world. Who's going to be number one? And in 1762, just like before the war was going to come to an end, France kind of saw the writing on the wall. So what they did is they gave all their land west of the Mississippi River to Spain. And at the war's end, basically, England agreed that Spain could have all this land, but they also took away Florida. Now, why would it be bad for Spanish Tejas that all of a sudden all this new land is added?
Resources get spread thin.
Not only resources get spread thin, but why did Spain care about Texas at all? Because who was on the other side? Who was on the other, back before this? Who was on the other side? This is France. Here's Spanish Texas. Who's on the other side? France. Because Texas was a border kind of colony or province. Well, now, guys, Texas is no longer a border province. It's Louisiana. And New Spain had very limited resources. Adjustments following the acquisition of Louisiana. Now, basically, though, as y'all did, some of y'all did point out, Spain did not have the resources or the people to govern this huge, vast territory. So in an attempt to discover what they should do, the Spanish king, Charles III, who was probably the best of the Bourbon kings, sent the Marquis de Ruby to inspect basically the northern frontier. Here you can see all the places he went, all the way from the Gulf of California over here to Los Angeles. And basically make notes on what should be done. He entered Texas, In 1767, he visited like El Chacon, San Saba, San Antonio, Nacogdoches, Los Ais, Los Ades, La Bahia. And when he gets back to Mexico City, basically he writes down, or he submits his report on what should be done. And basically he says the far-flung posts up on the border cannot be sustained. He basically called for abandoning all the missions and presidios in Texas, except for San Antonio and La Bahia. Because basically, instead of having a little people everywhere, you needed to have a lot of people in at least 2 places. He also wanted to basically carry out new Indian policy of new relations with the Native Americans. Basically, he thought he could work with the Comanches and Wichitans to help basically decimate and eradicate the Lipan Apaches. Everybody got it? Has anybody ever been to Goliad? That's what La Bahia is. Goliad's really cool. One of these days you're going down to San Antonio. You gotta take a little drive off. It's the best reconstructed Spanish presidio in all of North America. So what are we gonna do about pulling the people back? Well, guys, we're not really gonna have to worry about West Texas. Basically, in 1769, Indian attacks wiped out San Saba and El Canon. And it was the Comanche and Wichita that did that. East Texas, though, was a little more difficult. Basically, soldiers marched there and forced the evacuation of the population in 1773. And this is like right in the middle of when farms are in growth that people have devoted to that. Basically all the missions were abandoned. More than 500 settlers were torn away from their homes, farms, and ranches, leaving behind the growing crops and livestock. They forced them back to San Antonio, and they find that the land that they get in San Antonio is basically junk land that's open to attack and harassment by Comanches. So basically the East Texans get together, and their leader is Gilly Barro. Okay, guys, this is the way most Anglos up here in Texas spell his name. You could also spell it Gil, Y, lowercase, space, capital B-A-R-B-O, or I've also seen it Gil with an I instead of the Y. But regardless, Gilly Barro basically is chosen to be the leader of these guys. They petition the governor, Ripperda, to go back to East Texas. And the governor says okay, but then the viceroy says, hey, please put away your phone. Sir, put away your phone.
Sorry.
If you want to use it, I can understand it's interesting. Just get up and walk out like you're going to the bathroom. You can text out there, I don't know at all, it's not real.
Yes, sir.
No problem. Because I know sometimes we do get important messages, and also, guys, it's Friday, I understand everything. But be kind and courteous. The governor of Ibadan says, okay, but the viceroy says, no, you can't be more than 250 miles or 100 leagues. You have to be that far away from Natchitoches, over in Louisiana. So they say, okay, and they start a little town called Bucareli, named after a Spanish general, in August of 1774. And within 3 years, they've got like 357 people there, but floods and them being open to Indian attack makes them say, you know what, let's just move back to Nacogdoches. They have nobody's permission to do so. And they pull up stakes and they go back to Nacogdoches. And basically, after it's done, the authorities begrudgingly say, okay, I guess you can go back. Anybody been in Nacogdoches? Home of Stephen F. Austin, the Fighting Lumberjacks. Ready to go to the next slide? Now, in Native American relations, Rudy called their campaign of reduction or destruction was carried out against the Apaches. A former Frenchman by the name of Anais de Miers from Natchitoches in Louisiana was put in charge of the Indian affairs. He was able to speak several languages, including French, Spanish, Latin, among the Native American languages he could speak. And basically what he got the Spanish to do is start doing what the French did to the Indians. In other words, trade with them, keep up good relations through trade. And by 1771, he was able to make peace with the Wichitas. But Spain's goal of pacification for the northern tribes never really materialized. He was able to make peace with one of the tribes of the Comanches, but the Comanches are a nation that has many tribes. That would be like if America was an Indian nation and someone made a peace treaty with Oklahoma. Well, Texas could still attack them. Louisiana, New Mexico, even Oregon might come down every once in a while. And a continued campaign against the Apache was never really undertaken because basically Spain had a flying squadron, which means basically a cavalry unit that would go out and attack the Native Americans, of less than 200 soldiers. And you can't carry on a sustained war with small numbers like that. You know, it's an old Texas expression that somebody's all hat and no cattle. In other words, they're all talk, but they ain't got anything really to back it up. That's kind of like what the Spanish dreams are during this period. Ready? Spain, Texas, los Estados Unidos.
America.
Okay, to begin with, in dealing with the United States, Spain had actually sent expeditions to assist the U.S. in the Revolutionary War. They, like France, were foreign nations that aided us. Now, of course, the big reason why Spain did it, first off, they wanted to weaken and kind of distract Britain but also they wanted to retake Florida. Galvez, excuse me, who was the governor of Louisiana. Basically, they declared war, and before that he had been in military service in Coahuila. Spain declares war in July 27th, 1779. And he ordered for supplies by August of that year. More than 2,000 head of cattle have been driven up from La Bahia or Goliad. And from 1779 to 1781, more than 10 to 15,000 head of cattle were supplied to the rebels, as well as his own troops. He let America use New Orleans as a port. Basically, he opened a third front against the British, weakening their unity. And he was able to capture places like Mobile and the capital of Florida at Pensacola. But once again, once Britain was defeated, which surprised many, basically relations with the U.S. were tense. Because while the British were expansive, they knew their limits, the Americans didn't, which scared the hooey out of the Spanish. Now, just when you thought everything would be okay, who should come in and jiggy things up a little bit? Did y'all ever watch Family Matters? Nobody ever watched it? This guy would be the Steve Urkel of European countries. Did I do that? France. France once again muddies things up. In Europe, Napoleon is on the rise. He basically takes over Spain, puts his brother in as king, and then he forces his brother to give all the land west of the Mississippi that they had given to Spain. He makes Spain give back to France. Because he had this huge dream of a new world empire that he was going to build, having Haiti as its hub, which was a sugar isle. Well, he sent like 25,000 veterans to that island, because basically it was slaves that overthrew their old masters. And they had a really wise leader, the first leader, who said, don't kill everybody, stuff like that, because we're going to need their brains. But then when they landed in their first invasion, he was one of the first guys they killed. The rest of the slaves then say, we're not going back into bondage again. And that, combined with yellow fever, decimated the French troops, causing Haiti to be victorious. And by the way, America was the first country to recognize her. But when Haiti was out of the way, things started going against Napoleon in Europe. He desperately needed cash, so he was going to put the Louisiana Purchase up for sale. Two American diplomats just happened to be in Paris at the time. They were going to pay $2 million just for the city of New Orleans, which is at the mouth. And because if you control the mouth, you control the river. But the French foreign minister, Talleyrand, said, tell you what, I'll sell you the whole deal for $15 million. And of course, this blew their mind. You know, they didn't have the money, but they said yes. Then they wrote Thomas Jefferson, the president, and they said, hey, look, we got this deal to buy Louisiana. And Thomas Jefferson said, awesome. Now, he didn't have the power to do that, only Congress did. But Congress wasn't in session, so something had to be done. Well, anyway, so the purchase goes through and it's sold to the U.S., and almost as soon as it begins, that whole friendly, I own this, you own that, it doesn't really matter, because we're both cool to each other, kind of goes away. And America wants to know where the territory is. Indeed, Thomas Jefferson tried to get Texas to go all the way down to the Rio Grande River. Because the French landed there first, we bought it from France. Spain said, no. I tell you what, and basically there was going to be war, but Spain called out their army, the U.S. called out their army. General James Wilkinson, who would later conspire against the U.S., he comes up with a plan. He says basically, let's let it be kind of the Sabine River in 38th parallel. Spain won't go any further east than that, and America won't go any further west than the Arroyo Hondo. So this whole land in between was a neutral ground, meaning there wasn't really anybody who had authority over it. So as you can guess, it was a home to like bootleggers, criminals, until things finally get settled out. We ready? Well, when do things get settled out? Well, that's not until 1819 with the Adams-Owens Treaty. Basically, according to this treaty, the U.S. gave away its claims west of the Sabine River. We get Florida. Spain drops its claim to Oregon. And the U.S. forgives $2 million of debt that Spain owed us. So now there's a pretty sure boundary between America and the possessions of New Spain. Ready? Twilight of Spanish Texas, the first Anglo-Americans in Texas. Well, guys, by the late 1700s, there are some Americans that are coming into Texas. Now, of course, there are two kinds. The first are the good, hardworking, industrious, just trying to make a better life for themselves and their own. And the other were adventurers. Basically freebooters or filibusters. Best known of these was Philip Nolan, who basically was a horse trader, who may or may not have had Spanish permission. I mean, he was here as early as 1791. He came from Ireland, moved to Louisiana, was over here by 1791. On one trip he took out 1,300 horses, followed by another trip where he took out 2,000. So Spain was already, a lot of people thought that he may have been a spy for General James Wilkinson, because he was his bookkeeper. So Spain was a little bit unnerved about this guy, and they hear that he's come in, and this time he's brought some riders with him that are armed in 1800. So the Spanish army sends out dispatches a unit to locate him. He's found near Waco, on March 21st, 1801. And basically a battle ensues. He's killed, but the survivors were taken prisoner down in Mexico City. Ready for the next one? The Mexican Revolution begins. On September 16th, 1810, Father Manuel Hidalgo lets out his cry against the government of revolt, the Grito de Dolores. And even though he was defeated, this cry wouldn't end until basically Spain is evicted from the New World, or Mexico at least. And although Texas at first sided with the king, it soon became indifferent and critical. And we've got a whole series of like free, I would call them freebooters, basically guys that want to take over Texas. The first one is Juan Bautista de las Casas. That's him right up there. And his fellow conspirators basically seized officials at San Antonio. He declared himself governor of Texas. He takes his little army. They go out, they find that it's just as easy to take over Goliad and Nacogdoches. But basically on March 2nd, loyalists led by Juan Manuel Zambrano, Erasmo Seguin, and Francisco Ruiz capture and execute Las Casas. The next, and this one's really big, there's a picture of his army, is Bernard Gutierrez de Lara, who went to the U.S. in 1811. He tried and failed to get recognition for revolutionary Mexico, but he runs into Augustus McGee, a guy who was an officer with the U.S. Army. And basically, he persuades McGee to resign from the U.S. Army and help him recruit an army to liberate Texas. McGee agrees, and they're able to build a motley crew of more than 100 Anglo-Americans, Frenchmen, Mexican revolutionaries, and Indian allies. They march into Texas and are able to occupy Nacogdoches in mid-August 1819. They start publishing out propaganda, getting more people to their side. In November of 1812, the army laid siege to La Bahia. And remember, this whole time, they're getting more and more numbers. During this time at the siege, that McGee died, even though it may have been a suicide, we don't know. May have been a murder. More people think it was a suicide. The offensive stalled until February 1813, when the Spanish troops retreated to San Antonio. And in March, Samuel Kemper, the replacement for McGee, began to advance on San Antonio. where they're able to defeat a Spanish army of 1,200 men. The rebels go in and occupy San Antonio on April 1st, 1813. 5 days later, Gutierrez issued a Declaration of Independence for the state of Texas. So things are looking great. The Americans are along with it. But then on April 17th, Gutierrez proclaimed a constitution that provided for a centralized, not Republican form of government. Basically, it set forth a government that would be ruled by him as dictator and a military junta of 12 other guys, which not a lot of Americans were crazy about. And not only that, but Gutierrez was soon thrown out of power and replaced with Jose Alvarez de Toledo, a revolutionary from Spain. Spain, meanwhile, detached General Joaquin Arredondo, the Commandant General of the Eastern Interior Provinces, to put down this rebellion. And the rebel army, which now was numbering 1,400, was no match for Arredondo's 1,830. They met in a battle by the Medina River, a few miles west of San Antonio, on August 18th, 1813, and the rebels are soundly defeated. Now, following that defeat, however, Arredondo goes and he begins a purge of Texas. I mean, rebels were shot, property damaged, wives and daughters imprisoned. His depopulation of Texas was so massive that there wasn't even enough suitable people to fill the offices of the city and state government at San Antonio. I mean, he probably killed about a third of the population. And a young lieutenant that was with Arredondo and watched everything he did was Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Oh, are you ready here? So this is the real kind of big pivot point, this one. These ones are kind of, this one, okay, it was a Frenchman with about 100 other guys that were living by the Trinity River. Spain says go up. They say, okay, we'll leave. That's it. Not real exciting. James Long was a guy who gets other people. They go in. He has 300 people. They go in, they take over Nacogdoches. Then he splits his army. He leaves 150 in Nacogdoches. He goes then to go over to Galveston Island. Oh, and by the way, Galvez, the guy who helped America in the Revolutionary War, Galveston Island is named after Bernardo de Galvez. Anyway, James Long goes over to try to work out something with Jean Lafitte, and a pirate who's on the island. Jean Lafitte says no. He goes down and tries to take over Goliad, and he's killed. But his wife, Jane Long, is still in Louisiana. Beginning of Anglo-American colonization. Basically, the Spanish courts, CORTES, which basically is the ruling council, issued a decree opening all Spanish dominions to foreigners who would respect the Constitution and laws of the monarch. Because, guys, they know that they need people. Now, one of those who looked forward to this opportunity was a 56-year-old Missouri man named Moses Austin. Austin had moved to Spanish Missouri in 1798. Basically, he got permission to operate lead mines, and his method of refining was so efficient that basically using his method, he would charge other people, hey, you want me to refine your lead? I get to keep 3/5 of everything that I refine. But the miners were able to have so much more in that 2/5 than if they refined it another way. They went ahead and did this. Indeed, the lead for the first capital, American capital in Missouri, they used a Austin mine. Well, as he's operating these mines, he has to have miners come up, so he starts selling Spanish land, which gives him a full knowledge of Spanish real estate. Well, then Spanish Missouri becomes French Missouri, then it becomes American Missouri, and he's there the whole time, and he's making money. He's like one of the founders of the Bank of St. Louis. He sends his son off to Transylvania University. His son is a member of the territorial legislature. His son is also a judge. And he gets totally wiped out by what they used to call panics. Now we call depressions. In 1819, America was hit with the worst panic or depression they had since we began as a country. It lasted for more than 6 years. His wealth is totally wiped out. Well, one thing he knows how to do is how to sell land, and he knows there's lots of land in Texas. So he goes down, and on December 23rd of 1820, he meets the governor, Antonio Martinez. He meets the governor, Antonio Martinez. Wait, did I have him on that one? No. And the governor gives him permission to bring Americans down here. Well, he has a horse, and he's leaving San Antonio, and a guide is with him to get him out of Texas. Well, that guide is basically a horse thief. And 6 days out of San Antonio, he steals Moses Austin's horse. So he has to hoof it back up to Missouri. On his way back, he contracts pneumonia, and he dies. And this right here is actually a picture of his grave. Now, the funny thing about his grave, during the Great Depression, Texas had been spending a lot of money. Like, that's when they built the State Fair of Texas, you know, that's where they put a lot of their money. And we wanted the body of Moses Austin. Because we said, hey, you know, he's the father of Stephen. He's also just as important to the story of Texas. Missouri said, no, we're not going to give you his body. Texas said, no, we really want his body. Missouri said, no, you are not going to get his body. So freaked out was Missouri, they actually believed the Texans were going to come up and steal his body in the middle of the night, that they buried him in 10 feet of solid concrete. So that's why Moses Austin's grave looks like that. But let's go now and talk about Esteban. Oh, and by the way, guys, you want to know a sad thing? Has anybody been to they don't call it the Baker History Center anymore. Anybody here been down to UT Austin? There's a history center there, an American History Center. Anyway, they have a statue that's almost just like this, based on Stephen F. Austin. But guess what the president of the university decided to do about 4 years ago?
Take it down.
No, they just took the rifle and tomahawk away. This is the same president, and guys, I don't care how you feel about it. You know, I was kind of glad to see some of the statues go, like Jefferson Davis and Woodrow Wilson. But the way it used to be called the six-pack, where you had the Confederate statues, and one of those guys, by the way, wasn't a Confederate, he fought for Union, but he was damaged by casualty, I guess. They removed all those statues in the middle of the night, and I went back there about, I don't know, I guess it would be about a year ago, 8 months ago, to do a presentation before the Texas State Historical Association. And I graduated from UT Austin, so I was walking around a little before I had to do my presentation. I went by those things. All the statues are gone. But the big, huge daises or pedestals that they sat on that are about 5 feet high are all still there. And the names of all the guys who were in the statues are still there too. So it's like, if you're going to do it, go all the way. And talking of a guy who goes all the way is Stephen F. Austin. I already told you about some of his accomplishments before he decided to come down here to Texas. Well, he comes down here to Texas in the summer of 1821. Governor Martinez recognizes him as the heir to the opportunity that was outlaid for his father. Indeed, Martinez so wants people to populate Texas, especially after Arredondo had so depopulated it, that he allowed Austin to search for the land that he was going to take to start his colony. So Austin goes out, chooses the best land between the Brazos and Colorado rivers, and to make arrangements for his colony. And when he returns to Louisiana, he finds that he has more than 100 letters of interest. Because remember, people in America, they're going through tough times. Think about it though. Times are so tough, Americans are willing to move to another country just for a chance. Remember, Texas was part of Spain, now it's part of Mexico. You ready? These last two slides are real quick, so I'll go ahead and start passing around the... Actually, last 4 slides, because I got this and another slide. Mexican independence. Agustin de Iturbide was in Mexico City. He was supposed to lead his army out to fight against the rebels, but instead of fighting them, he begins to make negotiations, culminating in the Plan de Iguala on February 24th, 1821. Which made New Spain separate from Spain. And in August of 1821, Juan Donoja, who was the last viceroy of New Spain, recognized the independence of Mexico. Thank you. So what are some of the legacies of Spanish Texas? Well, basically Spain was able to hold authority on Texas all the way through until the collapse of New Spain, which was quite an accomplishment. Many of the streams, towns, geographic landforms in Texas bear Spanish names. In many of the sections of Texas, the land goes back to the original Spanish land grants. Spain is responsible for the cowboy that everybody thinks is so American. Well, all those cowboys use Spanish saddles. Words like rodeo, mustang, lariat, all Spanish words. Even a 10-gallon hat, some people say, is a bastardization of a Spanish word for a similar hat. Architecture, in San Antonio, there are still ruins and working missions that provide the glorious curves of the Longhorn. That's totally Spanish. And basically, Texas is a Spanish law-based state, particularly when it comes to property and the rights of women. Now, if I tell you class is over, are you going to cry? Okay, guys, be on the lookout, seriously, be on the lookout for the quiz review that I'll probably post up, well, I will post it up on Saturday, tomorrow. And you will also be getting your next assignment from Texas Voices. If you didn't turn in your assignment today, if you hadn't turned it in, put it up there. I will still allow you to turn it in next Friday, but you're going to have 2 of them. Oh, and by the way, guys, you're going to have 10 of these thought assignments, and guess how many points they're worth? 2 points each. But still do a good job on it, because 2 points may not sound like a lot, but guys, altogether that means all of these are equal to the points that your final is worth. All these are equal to the points that your midterm is worth. And pay attention to that quiz review, study for it. And that's about that. Have a great weekend. Movie theaters are open. I know Alamo Draft House is.
Thank you.
Go have a great weekend. Be superstars. Be immortal. Thank you, sir.